Being told you're going to die for your crimes is a lot to take in. But just when you know how they're going to react, they outright surprise you. Welcome back to our channel, where we give you the reaction of the 5 most brutal killers to their death sentences. All of the people described in this video are classified as serial killers. Historically, there is much debate about the definition of a serial killer. But generally speaking, it's someone who has killed 3 or more people over a while with cooling off periods in between each act. Most of the time, they enjoy hurting people and feel compelled to do so. These people usually show a range of mental disease symptoms such as schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, and antisocial personality, as well as depression and mood disorders. Viewer caution is required, as this video can be disturbing to some people. These killers are infamous for their crimes and have been sentenced to death for their actions and the impact they had on society. We will be analyzing their reactions to their sentences and their crimes, starting with Number 1. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy had several roles in his life, including as a parent, spouse, boyfriend, and son. But he was also a cold-blooded killer. Theodore Robert Bundy was an American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who was responsible for the deaths of at least 30 young women in the 1970s. Bundy was a charming and intelligent man who used his good looks and charisma to exploit his victims into trusting him. He lured his victims to his car by faking injury. Then, he would take them to a secluded spot and subdue and kill them. Even though it smelled bad, he occasionally returned to the body for several hours at a time to engage in sexual activity with the dead. Horrifying indeed! His trial was highly publicized and aired nationwide in the US, and his sentence was well-fitting. He gained some popularity throughout his trial due to his charm and confidence. Before delivering his sentence, the judge called him partner and wished him in a way, saying Bundy should take care of himself as he exited the courtroom. This was after hearing testimonies of Bundy's atrocities daily for weeks. It was his charm working on the judge. He was caught and prosecuted, and on January 24, 1989, he was put to death by electrocution. When Bundy was sentenced to death, he showed little emotion. He knew his fate was death, and there was no way out. Even then, he pleaded not guilty. His charm and demeanor were all that everyone remembered. Number 2. Nikko Jenkins. Most 15-year-old kids play video games, hang out with friends, and chase after girls. Nikko Jenkins, who was first diagnosed with mental illness at the age of 9, was serving a 189-year prison sentence on a carjacking charge in jail. He served 10.5 years before he became a free man on July 30th, 2013. Jenkins began his killing spree less than 2 weeks after his release from prison. During a police interview on September 3rd, 2013, Nikko Jenkins admitted to a murderous spree in Omaha that claimed the lives of 4 individuals. Jenkins claims during questioning that the killings were acts of sacrifice to Apophis, an ancient Egyptian god who embodied chaos. He pleaded guilty to all 4 charges of murder, and further elaborating in handwritten letters that he would protect Apophis's kingdom with animalistic, savage brutality. After being sentenced, he mutilated his body on many occasions, from carving a swastika on his forehead to cutting off his penis to look more like his god. "Do you not realize I've got Nikko Jenkins?" the detective asks in the video above. "I got Nikko Jenkins! I got you! I got your DNA at the murder scene. I've got your DNA in the car. I've got the weapon. I've got Nikko Jenkins." He was declared competent to stand trial after he was found to be faking mental illness by a psychiatric evaluation. Throughout the proceedings, Jenkins was disruptive, often speaking in tongues, laughing as prosecutors described the deaths, and talking to Apophis. While receiving his death sentence, he showed no emotions. Jenkins was sentenced to death for the murders and 450 years on weapons charges associated with the murders in May 2017. 3. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was an infamous serial killer and rapist who was responsible for the deaths of 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978 in Cook County, Illinois. Gacy was known as the Killer Clown because he was a clown performer at children's parties. Gacy attracted his victims with the promise of construction employment before sexually abusing and killing them, generally by strangling or asphyxiation. To his victims, he often referred to himself as Pogo the Clown. Gacy was a lonely child due to his violent father who abused him. He owned a prosperous construction company and made more than $250,000 per year. On his days off, he would perform as a clown, Pogo the Clown, or Patches the Clown, for children in hospitals and orphanages to lift their spirits. He was also involved in local politics. On May 10, 1968, Gacy was charged with sexual assault and arrested. Police then found he had buried a total of 27 bodies under his house. Shocking to say the least. When Gacy was sentenced to death, he showed no remorse and ridiculed the jury for entrapment. He was probably the most notorious and evil murderer in the United States to date. He believed that he was the victim of a conspiracy and ego, and that he had been convicted unjustly after a long and grueling trial, which he lost because of the mountain of evidence against him. He believed he would escape punishment right until the end, and was cool about it. Gacy was executed in 1994 by lethal injection, in full view of witnesses. He usually called other serial killers crazy and mentally unstable. He was labeled a homosexual killer given his demeanor, but denied it any time he was referred to it. His actual word from an interview after being asked about living in a mortuary in his younger days: "The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about." 4. Eileen Wuornos. Most of the killers were male. Eileen makes the list of brutal killers. Eileen Wuornos was a female mass murderer who was responsible for the deaths of 7 men in the late 1980s and early 1990s, losing her father to suicide and mother to abandoning her. She went to live with her grandfather. At age 11, Wuornos began trading sexual favors for money, alcohol, and cigarettes. She had her only child at 14 years of age. After this, she was kicked out of her home by her grandfather. Wuornos was a prostitute who killed her clients. The first victim was a shop owner, Richard Mallory, in 1989, a 51-year-old man who picked up a prostitute along a highway in Florida to engage in sex for money. Her trial was highly publicized. She reiterated her claim of self-defense throughout her testimony. But after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Wuornos guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder and armed robbery. An angry Wuornos shouted, "Sons of bitches, I was raped! I hope you get raped, scumbags of America!" When Wuornos was sentenced, she showed little emotion, as she knew nothing more could be done now. She believed that she had been justified in her actions, and that she had killed in self-defense. Wuornos was executed in 2002. Number 5. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was a notorious serial killer, rapist, and burglar, born in Texas in 1960. Ramirez was a heavy drug user and a Satanist who believed that he was doing the work of the devil. Before being apprehended in 1985, Ramirez had killed a total of 14 people and tortured dozens more. His 14-month murderous spree included gruesome killings, rapes, and robberies. Ramirez grew up idolizing his Vietnam War veteran cousin Mike, who he was very close to at that time. But Mike had a fascination with violence against women and showed little Richard photographs of women he had killed and raped in Vietnam. Eventually, he shot his wife in full view of Ramirez, who was just 13 at the time. This started his obsession with violence and bloodlust. Ramirez never expressed remorse, and after receiving a sentence, he stated, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory." He was called handsome by one of his victims during a trial in court. Even after being sentenced, he had a following of women after him. That was his effect on many women. When Ramirez was sentenced to death by gas chamber, he showed no repentance. He believed that he was a soldier of Satan and that he would be rewarded in the afterlife. Unfortunately, Ramirez died in prison of lymphoma while waiting for his execution. In conclusion, these killers showed a wide range of emotions. Some, like Eileen, lashed out at the jury, while others, like John Wayne Gacy, Nikko Jenkins, and Richard Ramirez, showed no remorse at all. Regardless of their reactions, these killers all received the punishment they truly deserved. It's important to note that the use of the death penalty is an issue of heated debates historically, and many countries have banned it. Moreover, some individuals who were initially sentenced to death have had their sentences reduced to life in prison, or have been pardoned through DNA evidence or other means. But aside from the punishment, it's important to remember their victims and to never forget the atrocities that these killers committed. I don't know about you, but I'll have a tough time sleeping the night peacefully after this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.